Well, ladies and gentlemen, actually one of the most interesting days in politics that I've seen for a while, because we've had two, and I say two, key speeches today, and I want to summarize both of them for you. The first is Donald Trump's State of the Union, and the second is Godongwana's budget speech. So let's get straight into it. But before I do, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. So Donald Trump opened his address saying that America is bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before. He called his first year of his second term a turnaround for the ages in the longest State of the Union address in the US's history. It was a whole 1 hour, 48 minutes. Now, Democrats sat largely in protest, some heckled, at least 40 lawmakers boycotted the speech. But overall, Trump did what he did. He just, gave a speech. Now, Trump claimed that the economy is in a, quote, roaring, pointing to Wall Street and jobs growth while downplaying slower growth in 2025. He did say that he's enabling everybody to benefit from the roaring stock market, but I've got a rather sizable share index, most of it in American stocks. Yeah, they ain't doing that well, so I'm not really sure what he's talking about. In any case, he said that inflation has plummeted and he blamed Democrats for high prices. Though he did say that inflation has eased only modestly, with food prices still higher year on year. After the Supreme Court struck down parts of his tariff regime, Trump attacked the ruling and pushed ahead with new global tariffs, 10%, aiming for 15% under alternative legal authority. Now, he had heavy focus on border closures and mass deportations, repeatedly linking immigration to crime. Trump accused Democrats of destroying the country and singled out the Somali American community in Minnesota, prompting heckles from the Somalian representatives at the State of the Union address. Now, he demanded lawmakers back the principle that government should protect citizens over illegal aliens. Now, this comes after certain partisan theatrics, which they've seen in places like New York, where Mamdani says he wants to be a sanctuary state and that all foreigners are welcome. This idea that many Democrats have of open borders. Now turning to Iran, Venezuela, and Ukraine, where Trump said that Iran is pursuing missiles that could reach the US, and repeated claims that US strikes obliterated Iran's nuclear program, while saying that he prefers diplomacy, but he may still strike Iran. News after his address came out that Iran had suggested that those bunker busters that he had apparently obliterated the programs with, well, apparently there were some of them that were unexploded and the Iranians were reverse engineering them so that they could steal their tech. So yeah, Trump's obviously going to be a little bit concerned about that. Now, he then boasted about US actions against Venezuela's leadership and claimed that Venezuela is now shipping oil to the United States, first time in a long time. Turning to the Ukrainian war, he framed Russia as not winning the Ukraine war and used foreign policy as proof of US strength. Now, he suggested that 25,000 Russians are dying every month in the conflict. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I can't really verify those claims. Trump did, however, lean into some made-for-TV moments, where he honored the U.S. men's Olympic hockey team and awarded a goalie the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Now, he also awarded the Medals of Honor to wounded servicemen and a 100-year-old Korean War veteran. Now, Democrats unwilling to be shown up by Trump, one individual, Al Green, was ejected from the chambers after holding up a protest sign. What is with this desire to just hold up protest signs everywhere? Anyway, he became one of the night's viral moments. Now, Trump's approval rating sits around 39%, with weaker approval on inflation and the economy. So Trump got into office with an incredibly high approval rate, but it's has shrunk quite a bit. Now, the Democrats slammed the speech as delusional and disconnected from ordinary American struggles. But the entire speech does show you the polarized nature of American politics. Now, I, for one, am not a fan of Democrats in the slightest, nor open borders. But some of Trump's positions I do question. This position on Iran, if we're going to attack them, we're not going to attack them, maybe we'll attack them, we promise to attack them, maybe next week. I really don't know what the guy's thinking. Anyway, let's move on to Godongwana's budget speech. Because Godongwana also gave a rousing speech where he said that South Africa is at an important turning point. Now, he said that he had scrapped 20 billion rands in planned tax increases thanks to a mining and commodity revenue windfall and strong bond demand. South Africa has had strong bond demands, with many individuals seeking good returns in South Africa, having fled the American markets or the dollar backing, and obviously gold is trading at an all-time high. So yeah, those are areas where we've experienced some very good luck, if you want to call it that. Now, Treasury forecasts improved growth. Apparently, we're looking at 1.6% growth this year, potentially 1.8% in 2027, reaching 2% by 2028. It's the first sustained growth outlook that South Africa's had in over a decade. Now, debt has peaked at 78.9% of GDP, but apparently has begun to fall and will begin to fall from 2026-2027 as fiscal discipline improves. So what we mean by fiscal discipline improving is, well, the state is practicing austerity and not just spending money on any old thing. Though we're going to talk about that in a minute, because I'm not really 100% sure how this is going to work. Now, in terms of personal income brackets, these were adjusted for inflation, with mild relief after 2 years of bracket creep. Now, Treasury admits that taxpayers are overburdened. Now, we're going to come back to taxpayers overburdened, specifically in relation to the NHI. And he says that the top 13% of taxpayers pay over 60% of personal income tax. Treasury admits that South Africa relies on a very narrow tax base compared to other countries. Now, in terms of the fuel levy, well, that's gone up. The government's cashing in whilst fuel prices are relatively low. Government actually hasn't highlighted much that the fuel price came down. I mean, I was surprised the other day when it filled up to realize that the fuel price was down to like nearly 19 Rand a litre. Oh, kind of shocked. Now, sin taxes are going up by 3.4%. That's beers, spirits, cigarettes. So all of that will be more expensive. And there are going to be big tax-free threshold increases. So this is because Godongwana says he actually wants South Africa to become a savings economy. It's not very communist of him, is it? Now, for the first time in years, we are getting a tax-free thresholds with meaningful increases. So what are those tax-free thresholds and what are the meaningful increases? Well, for those of you who don't know, you can get a tax-free savings limit. So it's kind of like what they call in the UK and the ISA. In South Africa, it's a savings account where interest isn't applied to. Well, the current limits of that is you can save annually 36,000 Rand, which is tax-free. That is now going to increase to 46,000. Now, in terms of retirement fund deductions, the cap is currently at 350,000. That is going to raise to 430,000 per year. Now, capital gains tax on your primary residence, the current threshold is 2 million Rand. That's going to increase to 3 million Rand. And VAT registration thresholds for small businesses is going to raise from 1 million to 2.2 million. And that should help SMEs with cash flow and administrative burdens. Now, in terms of offshore investments, South Africans can now take up to 2 million Rand offshore without tax clearances. Now, that is actually a huge increase because the current threshold is 1 million. Now, I did say we'd get back onto that austerity budget. We can't really talk about austerity unless we talk about the social grants, because the social grants are actually getting a huge increase. Now, most social grants are going to increase by around 3.6% for 2026-2027. Now, the old age, disability or care dependency grants are going to raise by 2,400, with child support grants also increasing by 580 Rand. Now, to pay for these grants, apparently 292,000 grant beneficiaries have been flagged for review after bank and credit checks, meaning that these individuals could find their grants cut, which will save Treasury a shed load of money. Now, apparently already 35,000 grants have already been cancelled, and that saved Treasury 170 million Rand. So you can imagine when you increase that by tenfold, we're looking at around 1.7 billion Rand saved. Now, the social relief grants is going to stay at 370 Rand until 2027, with talks of redesigning it into a livelihood grant. Because nobody really wants to hear a basic income grant because they know what that means. So we're not going to call it a big, we're going to call it a livelihood grant. Yeah, it's clever marketing, that. Now, in terms of infrastructure, apparently we're going to be spending 1.07 trillion rand on infrastructure over the next 3 years, with private sector participation being highly involved. Now, there's going to be extra funding for police and defense, and that's going to be used to tackle illegal mining, border control, and crime. There's also going to be additional funding for the judiciary and for the Border Management Authority. Now, Treasury claims that there has been progress on electricity supply stabilization, freight rail, and ports reform. Those areas are the main factors in South Africa not actually having any real technical growth over a period. So, combined with lower government borrowing costs, because obviously the rand to the dollar has improved, overall the budget's apparently looking pretty good, according to Godongwana. Now, state-owned enterprises are unfortunately still bleeding cash. So he says we have stabilized the electricity supply and we have reformed freight and ports, but Eskom and Transnet still remain financially fragile and will need more bailouts because Eskom and Transnet, I suppose. So what can we actually take from this? Well, there has been no major personal income tax cuts. I mean, I would have liked a tax cut, but I suppose we should be glad that he didn't actually increase the taxes, which I suppose is what concerns many of us every time he issues a budget. Well, in terms of fuel and sin tax, well, those have all been hiked, and the growth outlook is still weak by emerging market standards. 2%. Everybody else is like 5% and above. With this budget depending heavily on commodity prices and investor sentiment in the bond market, they better hope that commodity prices on gold stays up, because if that crashes, then this ain't going to look so good. And if the Americans are able to stabilize the dollar because of their policy issues, well, people might not be so keen on South African bonds, which will negatively impact this budget. In any case, we have to take it for what it is. It's not actually that bad a budget. At least we didn't get any tax increases and no wealth tax and none of the other usual rubbish that we had to listen to during the last ANC government. Still, anyway, I did say we'd go on to the NHI, because remember, that's also one of the things South Africa can't actually afford. One of the surprise news, a court has ordered the temporary halting of the rollout of the NHI Act and paused the implementation of the Act pending further litigation against it. Now, the government has agreed to stop proclaiming any sections of the NHI Act until the Constitutional Court rules on the matter. Now, this agreement was made an official court order on the 24th of February. Now, why was this court order needed? Well, that's because Minister Moron keeps trying to roll out the NHI whether it's in court or not. He don't give two flying monkeys. And we've already seen what that means when it gets through to Godongwana's budget. We've heard Godongwana numerous times talk about how there's no money budgeted for NHI. And he has raised the question a few times as to how Minister Moron thinks he's going to just pass regulations and tax people when it's not his job to do, it's Treasury's job. In any case, the Constitutional Court will hear key challenges on the 5th to the 7th of May. Now, the key case that they're going to be listening to is a case brought by the Board of Healthcare Funders and the Western Cape government. And their argument is that Parliament failed to allow meaningful public participation before Ramaphosa signed the NHI into law in 2024. Now, the challenges that actually got this pause passed included Solidarity, Private Doctors Group, Health Funders, and Sagelika. Now, they all agreed to pause litigation because they've all been issuing litigation against the government, but only if the government paused implementation. As I said, they've had to do this. And the reason for this is because Minister Moron just does his own thing anyway. So what does this actually mean? Well, Solidarity is calling the ruling a major breakthrough and saying that NHI is unworkable, unaffordable, and irrational. And they warned government not to allocate more money to NHI in the 2026 budget and threatened further legal action if it does. Godongwana didn't issue any funding for it. So there's that. Healthcare funders said that the pause creates space for proper engagement on fixing South Africa's healthcare system. Nobody has an issue with the whole idea of NHI, the fact that there needs to be meaningful reforms in the healthcare sector. What they actually have an issue is the government's implementation of it, the centralized funding, and the banning of the private healthcare sector. They've said that all along, but commies are going to commie, huh? Anyway, the president says that it's still committed to universal health coverage. And I'm reminded that we have a universal health care coverage right now. It's just that our healthcare is, well, shit, because the Department of Health is just terrible at managing anything, with most of our hospitals being looted by ANC cadres. Now, the Department of Health says that it will continue with all the preparation work needed to roll out the improvements of services offered by the NHI. So, yet again, you can see what the courts are dealing with, right? They've been told not to implement it, they've been told not to push anything further, and yet they just can't help themselves. And 90% of this is due to socialist ideology within the Department of Health itself. Now, the government insists that the pause won't delay as broader healthcare reforms, because again, they just don't care what the courts have to say. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it's important to understand NHI not dead yet, probably going to die at some point, and we all expect it to die at some point, but it's legally frozen. And we also predicted that that would be the case, that the act would be frozen for like forever. And in case, no current rollout, no implementation, no new NHI sections, and we didn't budget for it. It's delayed at best. But who knows what will actually happen when it actually gets to the Constitutional Court. I, for one, think that it's probably going to get sent back to drafting stage. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of all the speeches. And until next time, bye.